When the Dead Sea Scrolls were first unearthed, they sparked a wave of excitement, alongside a ripple of fear. Could these ancient manuscripts shed new, perhaps even groundbreaking light on the origins of Christianity? Could they reveal unknown details about Jesus himself? Was it possible they contained content that might challenge, question, or even disprove long-held religious traditions? While official statements downplayed any controversy, the reality was far more complex. In this video, we'll journey through the fascinating history of the Dead Sea Scrolls, examining them from both scholarly and Islamic viewpoints. The story behind how these sacred texts came to light is nothing short of astonishing. At one time, they were considered dangerous, hidden away, removed from public view by certain individuals. But truth has a way of surfacing. Let's uncover it together. Welcome to Inner Peace and Dean. We're just a two-person team, producing 3 thought-provoking videos every week. Subscribe to support us and stay informed. You won't want to miss what we have in store. Now let's begin. How old do you think the oldest handwritten copy of the Old Testament is? If Moses lived around 2500 BCE, you might expect manuscripts dating from that time. But the reality is quite different. The oldest complete Hebrew Old Testament in existence dates back only to around the year 1000 CE. That's just about 1,000 years old. There is no fully preserved Old Testament manuscript older than that. Surprising, isn't it? According to Islamic belief, the original Torah and Gospel were divine revelations from Allah, but were later altered by human hands. The Dead Sea Scrolls may contain glimpses of the Torah before those changes, offering insight into how the text may have been transformed over time. They might bring us closer to the original scripture. Let's rewind and revisit how this story began, because it's quite remarkable. On June 1st, 1954, a strange and intriguing advertisement appeared in the Wall Street Journal. It offered for sale ancient scrolls similar to the Bible, dated as far back as 200 BCE. If such a notice were posted today, many would dismiss it as a scam, a deep web ploy, or even a covert message involving espionage. But this was no joke. Despite efforts to suppress or distort the truth, the academic world understood the magnitude of what had been found, one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history. The actual discovery occurred in 1947 in the Qumran Valley, east of Jerusalem, on the western edge of the Dead Sea. This area, scarred by centuries of warfare and conflict, remains a militarized zone even today, often echoing with the sound of Israeli warplanes. It was here, 78 years ago, that history was rewritten. The story of their discovery is still debated, with some accounts taking on the feel of legend. Certain details remain uncertain, and historians debated them into the 1960s. But the most widely accepted version begins with a young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad from the Tamira tribe. He later claimed he was searching for a lost goat. Whatever the truth, his journey brought him to the cliffs of Qumran. There he noticed an unusual opening in the rock. Unable to see inside, he tossed a stone into the darkness and heard the unmistakable sound of pottery breaking. Intrigued, he climbed down and squeezed through the opening. He crawled into the darkness and eventually dropped into a hidden cave. Inside the cave, Muhammad found himself in a narrow chamber with a high ceiling. According to his account, the cave was about 2 meters wide and roughly 7 meters tall. Scattered throughout the space were several large clay jars, each standing around half a meter tall and about 25 centimeters in width. Many of these jars were broken, but it's believed that 8 of them remained intact. Even so, the exact number was never clearly recorded. Muhammad admitted that fear overtook him. He ran out of the cave, leaving everything behind. But curiosity got the better of him. The next day he returned, this time with a friend, to take a closer look. Some of the jars were sealed with bowl-shaped lids. Inside a few of them, they found 3 ancient scrolls wrapped in decayed, rotting cloth. These scrolls were made of specially prepared leather, treated for writing and illustration. They were the first Dead Sea Scrolls to see daylight in nearly 2,000 years. Over the following days, Muhammad returned to the cave and recovered at least 4 more scrolls. At least 2 of the jars were repurposed by the Bedouins to carry water. When proper archaeological excavations began later on, many shattered fragments were uncovered. Reliable sources suggest there were enough pieces to reconstruct at least 40 individual jars. But we will likely never know the full truth. How many jars were originally there? How many were full or empty? How many scrolls were removed, hidden, sold, destroyed, or used for other purposes before scholars could examine them? What we do know is that more scrolls were taken from the cave than were ever officially documented. Ultimately, 2 complete scrolls and 22 fragmented pieces were brought to public attention. From here, the story takes a more mysterious turn. The Bedouins, realizing they had found something potentially valuable, brought the scrolls to a local tribal leader, a sheikh. The sheikh, unsure of what they were, passed them on to a Christian antiquities dealer named Kondo. His full name was Khalil Iskander Shaheen, and he was a member of the Syrian Orthodox Church. Kondo then contacted George Isaiah, a figure associated with the Jerusalem Church. The 2 men acted quickly, reportedly returning to the cave to recover more scrolls themselves. George Isaiah informed Archbishop Athanasius Yeshua Samuel, head of the Syrian Jacobite Church and leader of the monastery of St. Mark in Jerusalem. Though Archbishop Samuel was not formally educated and could neither read nor identify the ancient texts, he sensed their significance. American author and commentator Edmund Wilson later noted that Samuel struggled even to determine whether the scrolls were made of leather or parchment. Still, Samuel's instincts told him that what he held in his hands was extraordinary. At St. Mark's Monastery, there was already an ancient collection of texts, giving the archbishop some sense of historical value. In August of that same year, Archbishop Samuel dispatched 5 monks, along with George Isaiah, back to the Qumran cave. They conducted their search under the cover of night, an illegal expedition. After extensive digging and examination, the group reportedly found at least 1 more jar and several new fragments. By the time the first official archaeological team arrived a year later, they found the cave altered. A second, larger entrance had been dug beneath the original opening discovered by the Bedouins. What exactly the monks found during their secret visits remains unknown. However, some claims suggest that scrolls never shown to the public were quietly taken by the church. What followed from here was filled with mystery, secrecy, and political intrigue, resembling something out of a Holy Grail adventure. But here, we'll stick to what's confirmed, or at least widely accepted by historians. And one of those facts is this. After Archbishop Samuel obtained several of the scrolls, he began seeking expert opinions to determine their age and significance. However, the scholars he consulted were unsure of what they were looking at. Many doubted both the authenticity of the scrolls and their antiquity. Despite not fully understanding what he had found, Samuel had a strong intuition. He believed these scrolls could be among the oldest surviving versions of the Bible and Torah, documents that might spark major theological debates. Concerned about their potential impact, he decided they should remain secret. Then in September of that same year, while on a trip to Syria, Archbishop Samuel crossed paths with Miles Copeland, the CIA's representative in Damascus. According to Copeland, a shrewd Egyptian trader approached him one day, claiming to possess something extraordinary. From a dirty sack, the man pulled out a fragile scroll, its edges crumbling and shedding tiny flakes of parchment. When Copeland asked what it was, the trader gave no clear answer. Instead, Copeland offered to photograph the scroll if the man left it with him for analysis. Copeland and his colleagues brought the scroll to the rooftop of the U.S. consulate in Damascus and began to unroll it. Just then, a gust of strong wind swept across the roof. Copeland later recalled with regret that parts of the scroll were torn away and blown into the streets, lost forever. Despite this mishap, the team managed to take about 30 photographs using equipment supplied by the U.S. government. These images were sent to the U.S. Embassy in Beirut and eventually shown to a specialist in ancient languages. The expert identified the scroll as a portion of the Book of Daniel from the Old Testament. Some sections were written in Aramaic, others in Hebrew. What became of the scroll after that remains a mystery. It was never made public, and its fate is unknown. But one thing is certain, it was real, and it has never resurfaced. Meanwhile, Metropolitan Samuel eventually contacted Professor Eliezer Sukenik from the Archaeology Department of Hebrew University. He showed Sukenik the scrolls he still had in his possession. On November 29, 1947, Sukenik secretly traveled out of Jerusalem to meet with those who had scrolls for sale. He was shown 3 scrolls along with the jars they were discovered in, items that had slipped out of the Metropolitan's hands earlier. He was allowed to take the scrolls home to study them. That same night, a major announcement came over the radio. The United Nations had just voted in favor of establishing the State of Israel. Sukenik later wrote that, in that moment, he felt a powerful symbolism, an ancient Jewish text re-emerging just as a new Jewish state was being born. He decided then and there to acquire the scrolls. By late January 1948, Sukenik arranged a private meeting to inspect the remaining scrolls still held by Metropolitan Samuel. During that meeting, Sukenik tried to negotiate a lower price. The Syrian middleman representing the Metropolitan agreed to schedule another meeting the following week. Meanwhile, Sukenik scrambled to secure the necessary funds. But days passed, then weeks. There was silence. No word from the Metropolitan or his representative. Finally, Sukenik received a letter. In it, Metropolitan Samuel declared that he had changed his mind. He would no longer sell the scrolls. The truth, however, would come out later. American scholars who had previously taken photographs of the scrolls had made a significantly higher offer, and Metropolitan Samuel had accepted it. In February, Samuel reached out to the Albright Institute in Jerusalem and sent full copies of the scrolls to Professor William F. Albright, a leading scholar from Johns Hopkins University. On March 15th, Professor Albright publicly confirmed what Sukenik had already suspected. The scrolls were authentic and among the most important biblical manuscripts ever discovered. Professor William Albright didn't just confirm the scrolls' authenticity, he boldly declared their historical significance. Without fully realizing it, he had just endorsed one of the most groundbreaking manuscript discoveries of the modern age. In his own words, he said, "I wholeheartedly congratulate you on the greatest manuscript discovery of modern times. I have no doubt the scrolls are even older than the Nash Papyrus. My preferred date is 100 BCE. He added confidently that there was not the slightest doubt about their authenticity. The scrolls were written on leather, papyrus, and even copper. Altogether, they amounted to around 40,000 fragments, some in Hebrew, others in Aramaic. These fragments represented the oldest surviving copies of the Torah and the Bible, making them the earliest religious writings known in the Abrahamic traditions. But these discoveries didn't happen overnight. It would take years of painstaking excavation, both legal and illegal, to recover the full collection of fragments. Then on April 12, 1948, an article on page 4 of the Times carried the headline, "Ancient Manuscript Found in Palestine." The piece, dated the previous day from New York, stated, Yale University announced the discovery of the oldest manuscript of the Book of Isaiah in Palestine. The scroll was found in the library of the Syrian monastery of St. Mark in Jerusalem and has been preserved as a scroll since around the 1st century BCE. It was confirmed by scholars from the American School of Oriental Research, now known as the Albright Institute in Jerusalem. But strangely, the world didn't respond with the excitement you might expect. Why? At that time, the New York Times was publishing major headlines almost daily. The Nuremberg war crime trials were still unfolding, with 14 SS officers sentenced to death. And just 2 days before the scroll story was published, Zionist militant groups Irgun and Lehi had attacked the village of Deir Yassin, killing women and children. In the shadow of these global and regional crises, the scrolls didn't make the impact they deserved. But while the public remained distracted, religious and political institutions behind the scenes began to take serious interest. They understood just how disruptive these scrolls could be. Because of the ongoing regional conflict, official archaeological digs were delayed for years. Instead, much of the early excavation was done illegally, often by untrained hands. The scrolls became a hot black market commodity, and soon a full-scale international scandal erupted. Fragments were smuggled across borders in cigarette boxes, wallets, and suitcases. Forgeries flooded the market, and con artists fooled collectors and scholars alike. Some nations were even willing to pay millions of dollars to recover authentic pieces. The whole saga is explored in the book The Dead Sea Scrolls Deception by Michael Begant and Richard Lee, the same authors known for works on the Templar, Knights and Holy Grail conspiracies. The book argues that the scrolls posed deep questions for Christianity. They challenged established narratives, suggesting, for instance, that the Zealots, a militant Jewish group, had messianic and nationalist goals, not unlike movements later linked to the figure of Jesus. Jesus may not have intended to found a new religion or abolish Jewish law, contrary to later interpretations. The scrolls describe a figure known as the teacher of righteousness. In some passages, the description of this mysterious leader closely mirrors that of Jesus. Many scholars have drawn parallels, though it's clear that this figure was not considered divine. These findings, grounded in linguistic study, carbon dating, and textual analysis, were backed by the tools of 20th century science. Yet even with such strong evidence, one has to ask, could a single discovery truly shake the beliefs of millions? That's why only a small portion of the Dead Sea Scrolls has ever been published. Even the limited material we've seen suggests these writings could seriously challenge long-standing Christian beliefs and point to the early roots of Abrahamic religion. Still, it's important to emphasize the most shocking sections were never made public. One of the most surprising discoveries was the copper scroll, found in cave number 3 at Qumran. Unlike the others, this scroll wasn't a spiritual or theological text, it was a list. It described 62 locations where gold, silver, and religious artifacts were supposedly hidden. Most sites were in Jerusalem, especially around or beneath the temple. Others stretched out into the surrounding hills, all the way back to Qumran. If accurate, the treasure described would total about 65 kilograms of silver and 26 kilograms of gold. While not massive by modern treasure hunting standards, its religious and symbolic value could be immeasurable. The copper scroll was never officially released to the public, but scholars who studied it believe the treasure might have come from the Second Temple, hidden away during the Roman invasion of Jerusalem around 68 CE. However, some members of the official research team, like Professor Cross and Father Millick, dismissed it as fiction, a symbolic or imaginary list. Today, many independent historians disagree. They argue the treasure was real but has likely been lost to time. That's because the directions rely on ancient local landmarks, long since erased by 2,000 years of war, natural change, and destruction. Still, the secret scroll market continues to exist. Unknown documents may still be hidden, waiting to be revealed. The real question is, when will those holding them finally come forward? Whenever that happens, new discoveries could fundamentally change what we know about ancient Judaism, the true origins of Christianity, and even the formation of Islam. The Dead Sea Scrolls offer a new perspective on the three major Middle Eastern religions, and the more we study them, the clearer it becomes. They are not as different as we once believed. They overlap, share common roots, and seem to stem from a single source. Do the scrolls support the Quran and Islam? Some elements of the Dead Sea Scrolls appear to align with Islamic teachings, particularly shared origins. The scrolls confirm that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam share a common foundation, echoing the Islamic concept of Tawhid, the belief that Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, peace be upon them, were all messengers of the same divine truth. Criticism of Christian dogma. The scrolls challenge traditional claims about Jesus' divinity. One scroll describes a suffering servant whose story parallels Jesus's, but it comes from an earlier Jewish tradition. This supports the Quranic view that Jesus was a prophet, not a divine being. Changing the gospel. The scrolls highlight inconsistencies between early Christian texts and modern Christian doctrine. This supports Islam's belief, clearly stated in the Quran, that the original gospel was altered over time. Sectarian disputes. The scrolls show that Jewish communities were deeply divided with differing laws and beliefs. The Quran also describes how the people of the book fell into disagreement, reinforcing this historical context. Meanwhile, in the centuries before printing, Jewish scribes would destroy old copies of the Torah once new ones were made. This means earlier versions did not survive on purpose. By contrast, the Quran has been preserved in its original form, with physical manuscripts dating back to the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. One famous early copy is even housed at the University of Birmingham. Later, with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars finally gained access to much older versions of the Torah. This dramatically changed the belief that no ancient manuscripts of the Torah had survived. The scrolls are invaluable for many reasons. They include portions of the Torah, Jewish legal texts, apocalyptic prophecies, ancient prayers. The most famous scroll is the Book of Isaiah, a nearly complete, beautifully preserved document. Some claim the scrolls prove the accuracy of today's Bible, and in certain cases, such as Isaiah, this appears true. But in many other books, major differences emerge. For example, the Book of Jeremiah found among the scrolls is 15% shorter than the version used today. The Masoretic text, which underpins most modern translations,